Vena cava clamped. You're clear to sew.
Thank you, doctor. How are the vitals?
Heartbeat is erratic, but improving.
Elmdale was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone, but no one knew Lucas Tran. The old folks like to say Elmdale hadn't changed in 50 years, and that was mostly true. Sunday sermons still filled the little white church at the corner of Main and 2nd. The Dairy Freeze was still the only place to get a decent milkshake, and people still sat on their front porches in the evening, waving at every pickup that passed by. But on the edge of town, just beyond where the pavement turned to gravel, sat a weather-worn house with peeling paint and a broken screen door. It belonged to Emily Tran and her 15-year-old son, Lucas, a boy who had not been seen in public in nearly 6 years. Inside, Lucas sat curled on the window ledge, hidden behind a faded green curtain. The sunlight filtered through in broken lines, casting his face in streaks of golden shadow. Not that it made much difference. Lucas didn't look in mirrors anymore. He hadn't in years. On the left side of his face was a mass of skin and tissue, heavy and discolored, drooping past his jaw like melted wax. It covered his eye, twisted his mouth downward, and pulled on his neck so that he always sat slightly hunched. The doctors once called it a vascular tumor. The kids at school had called it something else. Monster. He remembered the first time he heard it, clear as yesterday. Lucas had been 7. It was his first and last day at Jefferson Elementary. He'd worn a button-up shirt his mom ironed the night before, and a backpack with cartoon robots. When he walked into the classroom, the room went silent. Then a little girl screamed. By lunchtime, he was gone. Since then, the town forgot about Lucas and he tried to return the favor. He stopped asking about school, stopped going outside, stopped dreaming about being seen. Only his mother saw him now. Emily Tran worked 2 part-time jobs, cleaning houses and managing inventory at a local thrift store. She always left before sunrise and returned after dark. But every evening she brought Lucas something. A book, a magazine, a funny story from town, anything to remind him that life was still happening out there. Lucas never complained, not out loud anyway. In the quiet of their home, he escaped into his sketchbook. He drew himself with a different face, normal, symmetrical, smiling. Sometimes he drew superheroes with masks, sometimes boys with perfect teeth and eyes that didn't need to hide. But most often, he drew himself standing in line at a gas station, buying a Dr. Pepper like a regular kid. That was his dream. Not fame, not fortune. Just one day where no one stared. Emily kept her fears private. She never cried in front of Lucas. But at night, when she thought he was asleep, he could hear her. Sometimes it was just a sigh, long and exhausted. Other times it was quiet weeping behind the bathroom door. He didn't blame her. Thomas Tran, Lucas's father, had left when Lucas was 5, back when the tumor was still small, back when there was still hope. "I didn't sign up for this," was all Thomas had said before he walked out the door. Since then, it had just been the 2 of them. No insurance, no savings, no doctors willing to operate without tens of thousands of dollars up front. Every time Emily made a phone call to a hospital, it ended the same way. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Without insurance coverage or a Medicaid approval, there's nothing we can do." Lucas heard those words so many times he started to believe them, but he still drew, every single day. Somewhere in Elmdale, kids were probably playing in the dusty fields behind the school. In a few hours, the church bells would chime 6 times and families would gather for dinner, say grace, and talk about the weather. Lucas would stay behind his curtain. Most days passed like this, slow and quiet, like molasses in January. But today something was different. There was a knock at the door. Lucas froze. Nobody knocked on their door. Delivery drivers left packages at the gate. The neighbors mostly ignored them, except for the occasional glare when Emily parked too close to someone's fence. He waited, holding his breath. Another knock, lighter this time, almost polite. Then a voice. "Hi, my name's Anna. I'm with Medical Hope. We're offering free wellness checkups around Elmdale this week." Lucas tilted his head, just enough to catch a glimpse through the edge of the curtain. A young woman stood on their porch holding a clipboard. She looked about 20, with straight black hair and a soft, friendly smile. There was something about her that didn't match the rest of Elmdale, something open, kind. He didn't move. Anna hesitated for a moment, then glanced toward the window. For a split second, their eyes met. Lucas pulled the curtain shut, That night, Emily came home with tired eyes and a bag of groceries. She set down a can of beans and a box of instant rice on the kitchen counter. "Someone came by today," Lucas said without turning from his sketchpad. Emily stopped. "Who?" "A woman, said her name was Anna, from some medical group." Emily's shoulders stiffened. "They offering free checkups," Lucas continued, voice even. "She saw me, I think." Emily exhaled slowly and leaned against the counter. "Lucas." "I know," he said before she could finish. "We've tried before. We can't afford another dead end." She crossed the room and sat beside him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then she asked, "Did she say she was coming back?" Lucas nodded. "Maybe." The next day, Anna returned. This time, Emily answered the door. Anna introduced herself again, a little more cautiously. "We're with a non-profit that partners with volunteer surgeons. We're not promising miracles," she said gently, "but sometimes there's a chance." Emily listened, arms crossed over her chest, guarded. Anna hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Inside were photos, before and after shots of children with facial tumors, cleft palates, burns, all transformed. "My mom used to tell me," Anna said, "that healing doesn't always start in a hospital. Sometimes it starts when someone sees you." Emily's eyes filled with tears. Lucas stood just out of sight behind the wall, listening. The next week moved faster than any Lucas could remember. Anna returned with paperwork, consent forms, and questions. She brought a portable scanner and took high-resolution photos of Lucas's face. She never stared. She never winced. She just talked to him like he was normal. Lucas didn't trust it at first. He'd been through too many hopeful starts that ended with apologies, too many doors that never opened. But something about Anna made him wonder, just a little, if this time was different. And for the first time in years, Lucas looked at himself in the mirror. Not long. Just a few seconds. He didn't see a monster. He saw a boy waiting for a chance. Lucas Tran was 5 years old the first time someone stared at him like he wasn't human. It had been a grocery store clerk, a teenage girl behind the checkout counter. Lucas had walked in with his mother, holding her hand tightly, bouncing on his toes as 5-year-olds do. He was excited. He had just learned to read the word milk on the shopping list. But when they reached the register, the girl's face twisted. Her eyes darted down to Lucas, then quickly away. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. Just scanned the items and bagged them as fast as she could. Lucas didn't understand, not really, but he felt it. And that was before the tumor had grown to what it would become. Back then, it was just a swollen patch on his cheek. Some days it looked better. Other days it puffed red and heavy. Emily had taken him to a local clinic when he was 3. The doctor examined him for 10 minutes and gave her a name, vascular anomaly, and a number for a specialist 3 towns over. But the specialist wouldn't take uninsured patients, and Medicaid required a diagnosis from that same specialist to approve coverage. It was a loop, and they were caught in the middle, so they waited, and the mass grew. By the time Lucas turned 7, the swelling had thickened. It tugged at his mouth, made it hard to chew. His left eye began to close slightly, but he still smiled, still laughed, still begged to go to school. Emily hesitated for weeks. Then finally, she said yes. It was a cloudy Monday in September. Lucas wore a collared shirt, 2 sizes too big, and a pair of khaki pants she found at the thrift store. He packed his lunch in a paper bag and drew a smiley face on it with crayon. Emily kissed his forehead before he stepped onto the yellow bus. "Be brave," she whispered. When he entered Mrs. Fletcher's 2nd grade classroom, everything stopped. The room fell silent like someone had hit the mute button. Lucas looked around, unsure. Then it started. Small whispers, nervous glances. A boy snorted. A girl covered her mouth. One child asked too loudly, "What's wrong with his face?" Lucas stood still. Mrs. Fletcher stepped forward and tried to recover. "Everyone, this is Lucas. Let's welcome him." A few kids mumbled half-hearted hellos. Lucas took his seat at the back of the class next to a boy who subtly slid his chair farther away. By mid-morning, things were worse. During art time, a girl screamed. Lucas had been quietly drawing, a house with a dog and a son. But when he leaned over to ask for the blue crayon, she shrieked and fell off her chair. "He touched me! His face touched me!" Mrs. Fletcher rushed over. The girl cried hysterically. Some kids laughed. Others looked frightened. Lucas didn't understand. His lips trembled. He turned to the teacher. But Mrs. Fletcher didn't meet his eyes. "Lucas," she said softly, "why don't you take a break in the hallway?" He stood up slowly and walked out, holding the crayon in his hand like it might still matter. Emily got the call that afternoon. She left work early and arrived at the school, only to be met by a counselor and the principal in a small office with low lighting and too many chairs. "We're concerned," the principal said. "The students had a strong reaction. We're not equipped for this kind of situation." Emily tried to explain. She mentioned the diagnosis, the lack of insurance, her efforts to find help. The counselor shook her head sympathetically. "We're not saying he can't come back," she said, "but perhaps it's best, for now, that you consider alternative education." That night, Lucas didn't cry. He sat on his bed in silence, clutching the crayon drawing he had made that morning, now crumpled and torn at the edges. The dog he'd drawn had one floppy ear, and the son wore sunglasses. It was supposed to be funny, bright, happy. Now it just looked stupid. Emily sat beside him, unsure whether to hug him or let him be. She chose to stay quiet. Lucas didn't move. He didn't ask questions. He didn't look up, but something inside him had shifted. The next day, he didn't get out of bed. At first, Emily told herself he just needed time. A few days, maybe a week. But days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. And slowly, Lucas disappeared from the outside world. No more grocery store runs. No more asking to play at the park. He stopped asking questions about school. He didn't even complain when they had canned soup 3 nights in a row. He just shrank. Emily tried everything. She borrowed children's books from the library, bought a secondhand computer for homeschooling, even contacted a support group for kids with facial differences. But without consistent internet and without money for transportation, her options were limited. Every clinic she called asked the same first question: "Do you have insurance?" She always hesitated. "No, but..." And that was usually the end of the conversation. Lucas's condition got worse. By age 10, the tumor had nearly doubled in size. It stretched from his temple to the base of his neck, causing him to tilt slightly to one side. His left eye was now completely closed. His jaw shifted, affecting his speech. He didn't talk much anyway. Once Emily found him standing in the hallway in the dark, staring at the mirror. She hadn't seen him do that in years. "Lucas?" she whispered. He turned, startled. "I just wanted to see." She waited, heart heavy. "I thought maybe," he said, voice low, "if I didn't look for long enough, maybe it would be gone." Emily swallowed hard. "You are not your face." Lucas gave a half shrug. "That's easy for you to say." After that, he taped a piece of paper over the mirror. On it, he drew a new face, his face, but without the tumor. A small, lopsided smile, 2 bright eyes. He stared at it every morning. That became his reflection. Emily never stopped calling clinics. Every few months, she tried again. She learned to talk faster, to get as much out as she could before they shut her down. She learned how to say vascular anomaly like she had a medical degree. She even applied for Medicaid 3 times. Each time they denied her. Not urgent enough, not life-threatening, not eligible. She begged, she yelled. Once she broke down sobbing on the phone. Nothing worked. Eventually she stopped calling. She told herself that she had done everything she could. That maybe the world just wasn't built for boys like Lucas. But late at night, when she passed his door and heard the scratch of pencil on paper, her chest ached with guilt. He was still drawing, still imagining the life that had been taken from him before it even began. One night, she found a sketchbook left open on the kitchen table. Lucas had fallen asleep on the couch. She flipped through the pages. There were dozens of drawings of Lucas at different places, buying candy at the gas station, raising his hand in a classroom, riding a bike with a helmet too big for his head. One image made her breath hitch. It was a picture of Lucas standing at a graduation podium, giving a speech. Behind him stood a crowd. They weren't laughing. They weren't staring. They were listening. She traced her finger across the page and whispered, "Please, just let someone see him." The summer heat in Elmdale was the kind that made everything feel slower, like the air itself didn't want to move. Cicadas screamed from the oak trees, and the pavement shimmered under the sun. Lucas stayed inside, as always, hiding in the shaded corners of his room with a box fan buzzing like a tired wasp. He was drawing again, this time sketching a boy at a movie theater. The boy had popcorn, a group of friends, and a face that wasn't his. Down the road, a white van rolled into town, with the logo Medical Hope, restoring dignity, through medicine printed on the side. It parked outside the community center. 3 volunteers stepped out, 2 in scrubs, 1 in jeans, and a Medical Hope t-shirt. The last one was Anna Nguyen. Anna was 23. Born in California to Vietnamese immigrant parents, she had grown up translating medical forms for her grandparents. She had seen firsthand how people were left behind by a system that was supposed to care for them. That's why, instead of spending her summer studying for the MSAT, she was here, in Elmdale, Texas, on a mobile clinic rotation. She liked small towns. They felt like secrets, broken places where stories hid under front porches and behind polite smiles. The clinic set up quickly, a folding table, brochures, a mobile blood pressure machine, and a line of curious but hesitant locals. Most came for the free Tylenol or a check on their diabetes meds. A few brought their kids. Nobody expected much. Elmdale wasn't a town that believed in miracles. Anna noticed that right away. On her second day, she heard whispers about a boy on the edge of town. "You mean the Tran kid?" one woman said, shaking her head. "That poor thing, ain't been seen in years." Another called him that monster boy, like it was a fact, not an insult. Anna didn't like the way they said it, casual, distant, like Lucas wasn't real, like he wasn't someone's son. That afternoon, she asked the local librarian for an address. The woman hesitated, but eventually scribbled down a street name and pointed toward the gravel road beyond the old water tower. Anna walked. It was nearly 100 degrees out. Her backpack clung to her like a second skin, and the sweat rolled down her back in steady lines. But she kept walking. When she reached the house, she paused. It looked tired, worn down, like it had been holding its breath for years. She stepped onto the porch and knocked. No answer. She knocked again, softer this time. "I'm with Medical Hope," she called gently. "We're offering free wellness visits. No insurance needed." Inside, Lucas froze. He was sitting at the kitchen table, pencil in hand, mid-sketch. He looked at his mother. Emily stood by the sink, her hands tight around a dish towel. "She's from that group?" Lucas whispered. Emily nodded. "What do you want to do?" Lucas didn't answer. He didn't know. Anna waited for another minute, then stepped back, slipping a flyer into the crack of the door. "We'll be at the community center all week," she said. "If you need anything at all, we're here." And then she left. That night, Lucas unfolded the flyer. It was simple, white and blue. At the bottom was a photo, 2 boys before and after surgery. One looked like him, the other looked free. Lucas kept the flyer in the top drawer of his desk, beneath his sketchbook, and a pencil sharpener shaped like a baseball. He didn't look at it, not directly, but he thought about it. More than once, his fingers hovered over the drawer, tempted to unfold it again. Emily said nothing about the visit. She hadn't thrown the flyer away. That, in itself, felt like something. On the third afternoon, while Lucas was pretending not to listen to the cicadas outside his window, there was another knock. He didn't move. Emily answered this time. Anna stood there, same backpack, same gentle smile. "I'm sorry to drop by again," she said, voice soft. "I just thought I'd check in." Emily hesitated. "You're persistent." "I've been called worse," Anna replied with a small laugh. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, not with judgment, not with pity, just curiosity, maybe even hope. Emily opened the door a little wider. "You can come in for a few minutes." Anna stepped inside, careful not to let her shoes creak on the old wooden floor. The house was clean but quiet, too quiet. No television, no music, just the low hum of the ceiling fan and the faint scent of lemon cleaner. Lucas stayed in the hallway, just out of sight. Anna knew he was there. She didn't try to force it. Instead, she sat at the small kitchen table and pulled out a folder. "We partner with surgeons from all over the country," she explained. "Some of them volunteer, some are retired, some just care more than the system ever did." Emily sat across from her, arms crossed but listening. "We don't charge," Anna continued, "and we don't need insurance. We just need consent, a medical history, and, if possible, photos for review." Emily's fingers twitched. "Photos?" Anna nodded. "Just for the surgeons. They need to see the case before deciding if it's operable." Emily looked toward the hallway. Lucas stood still, hidden behind the wall. He was listening, heart pounding, every muscle tense. Anna glanced toward the space, not directly, but gently. She raised her voice just enough. "I've seen a lot of patients," she said. "Burn victims, birth defects, trauma. But I've never seen someone fight as hard as the kids who've been told they're unfixable. Lucas's chest tightened. Sometimes, Anna added, all it takes is one person who believes you're worth the effort. Emily said nothing for a long time. Then slowly she stood and disappeared down the hallway. A minute later she returned with Lucas beside her. He didn't raise his head. His shoulders were slumped, hands in his pockets. The left side of his face sagged under the weight of the tumor, just as Anna had been told. But it wasn't just the physical heaviness. It was the weight of years. Anna smiled, not too wide, just enough. Hi, Lucas. I'm Anna. It's really good to meet you. Lucas didn't answer, but he nodded once, and that was enough. Anna didn't ask to see his face. She didn't reach for her phone. She didn't push. She simply opened the folder and started explaining the next steps. How they'd submit his case, how long the process might take, what to expect if a surgeon accepted it. She left the folder on the table when she walked out. That night, Lucas opened it. Inside was a small handwritten note. Your story isn't over yet. Let's find the next page. Anna. Anna stayed up late that night. The motel room she shared with another volunteer smelled faintly of disinfectant and microwave noodles. Her laptop sat open on the desk, casting a soft glow over the tangle of papers spread across the surface. She had a folder for every patient from the Elmdale visit, 22 in total. But Lucas's was the only one she kept separate. She had taken careful notes. She hadn't snapped any photos. Lucas hadn't said she could, but she had included a detailed diagram, a medical description based on her observations, and a letter written in her own words. She attached everything to an email and stared at the to field for a long time. Then she typed, Dr. Henry McKinnon, University of Chicago Medical Center, Retaud, Private Volunteer Network, Facial Reconstruction. She'd only heard of him through other volunteers, rumors mostly, that he had operated in 5 countries, that he didn't charge a dime, that he had once performed a 20-hour surgery on a girl from Honduras who no one else would touch. She clicked send at 1:12 a.m. Then she waited. 3 days passed. Lucas didn't ask about the process, but every time Anna dropped by with forms or updates, he lingered longer near the table. He even asked her once if all surgeons wore masks in the operating room. She smiled. Most of them. Why? He shrugged. Maybe it's easier to do something hard when people can't see your face. She nodded. Maybe. Or maybe it's the opposite. On the 4th day, the email arrived. It was short, just a few lines. Anna, this is one of the most complex cases I've seen in years. The facial mass appears vascular in nature, likely neurofibromatosis or AVM. Risk of nerve damage is high, but I've handled worse. I'm willing to evaluate him in person. HM. Anna reread it 3 times. Then she smiled. She forwarded the message to Emily's email, an old AOL address she barely remembered the password for. But just to be sure, she printed it out and drove to their house. When she arrived, Emily was watering a patch of dry grass near the mailbox. Lucas sat on the porch swing, sketchbook in his lap. Anna stepped out of her car holding a single sheet of paper. You got something? Emily asked, setting down the hose. I did, Anna replied. She handed her the paper. Emily read it slowly. Her hand trembled. She passed it to Lucas without a word. He read it once, then again. He wants to see me? Lucas asked, eyes wide. In person, Anna said. He's based in Chicago, but he's willing to travel. Why? Lucas asked, barely above a whisper. Why would someone like him care? Anna didn't answer right away. She sat down beside him on the porch swing. I don't know everything about Dr. McKinnon, she said, but from what I've heard, he doesn't care about what people see. He cares about what people carry. Lucas looked down at his sketchbook. On the page was a drawing he'd been working on all morning. A man with silver hair and steady hands, standing behind an operating table. The man looked calm, strong, capable. He hadn't drawn a face yet. He picked up his pencil. Dr. Henry McKinnon was not a man who rushed into decisions. At 71, he had spent nearly 4 decades inside operating rooms, some with the best equipment money could buy, and some in refugee camps with only flashlights and prayer. He had retired from the University of Chicago Medical Center 5 years ago. Retired, technically. The hospital kept a parking spot with his name on it, just in case. He had learned a long time ago that sometimes the most important surgeries happened far from any hospital. The email from Anna had arrived in his inbox late on a Thursday night. He had almost ignored it, Most emails from volunteer organizations were updates, donation requests, or red tape. But something about the subject line caught his eye. 15-year-old male, Texas. Severe facial mass, no insurance. He opened the file. The summary was professional but human. Anna's tone wasn't clinical. It was careful, respectful, honest. Then he read the letter. She didn't beg for help. She didn't sensationalize Lucas's condition. She simply told his story. The boy who had been hidden for years. The mother who had tried every door. And the moment Anna saw a spark of hope in his eyes. Henry leaned back in his chair. He thought of another boy, his own son, Caleb, who had been born with a rare cranial defect, the kind that required surgery before his first birthday. Their insurance had covered most of it, but not all. Henry had been in residency then, barely making rent. He remembered arguing with the billing office while his wife cried in the hallway. He remembered signing a loan he couldn't afford just so Caleb could live. Caleb had survived, but the cost had nearly broken them. Henry never forgot that feeling, the helplessness of being a parent in a system that didn't care unless you could pay. It was what pushed him into reconstructive surgery in the first place. Not just the science, not just the skill, the injustice of it all. He replied to Anna the next morning, and now, sitting in his study with a cup of black coffee and a thick envelope of printed files, he read over Lucas's case again. The tumor was extensive, likely vascular, possibly entangled with nerves. Removing it would risk partial paralysis, vocal damage, even blindness. It would take hours, maybe multiple surgeries, but it was possible, and more importantly, it was necessary. Henry closed the file and stood up. He walked to the wall where framed photos lined the paneling, smiling patients from around the world. Brazil, Kenya, Philippines, Appalachian children with cleft palates. A man from Detroit who had lived under a freeway bridge for 12 years before someone brought him in. Every photo had a date and a name, but no price tag. Henry picked up the phone and called a number he hadn't used in months. "Hey," he said, when the voice on the other end answered. "I need an OR. You coming out of retirement, McKinnon?" "Just for one more," he said. "Maybe two." He paused. "Oh, and book me a flight to Texas." The airport in Amarillo was smaller than Dr. McKinnon remembered. He'd been through dozens of airports in his life, LAX, Heathrow, Manila, Nairobi, but there was something oddly grounding about this one. One terminal, two baggage carousels, and an old vending machine near the exit that still sold 75-cent sodas. The rental car was a dusty sedan with a weak air conditioner, and the drive to Elmdale took nearly 2 hours along cracked roads and endless stretches of prairie. Cows dotted the hillsides. The occasional pickup passed with a polite wave. Dr. McKinnon didn't mind the quiet. It gave him time to think. He had reviewed Lucas's file 5 times during the flight, made notes, sketches, a mental map of the anatomy he might encounter. But none of that would matter until he saw the boy himself. Medical Hope had arranged a meeting at the Tran house, and when he pulled up, the place looked exactly as Anna had described. Small, worn, but cared for. A home that had seen more prayers than answers. Emily opened the door before he could knock. She looked exhausted, but there was dignity in the way she held herself. Protective, cautious, but not hostile. "Dr. McKinnon," she said, offering her hand. He shook it firmly. "Thank you for having me." Inside, the house was quiet. A fan spun lazily in the corner. On the wall were 3 framed photos. One of Emily holding a baby, one of Lucas at maybe age 4, smiling before the tumor became too visible, and one of a hand-drawn portrait. McKinnon paused at the last one. It looked like Lucas, but better, a dream version. "He drew that," Emily said, following his gaze. McKinnon nodded. "He's talented." "He draws a lot," she added. "Always has." Then from the hallway, footsteps. Lucas appeared slowly, one shoulder pressed to the wall as if for support. He was taller than McKinnon expected, with dark hair and eyes that flicked upward only once before dropping back to the floor. The tumor on the left side of his face was more severe in person, thicker, heavier, and more complex than any photograph could capture. McKinnon didn't react, not with pity, not with surprise. He smiled gently. "Hi, Lucas, I'm Henry." Lucas gave a short nod but said nothing. "May I sit?" McKinnon gestured toward the couch. Emily motioned him in, and they all sat, Lucas in the corner, as far from McKinnon as possible. The surgeon didn't pull out any tools. No pen light, no gloves, no forms. Instead, he reached into his bag and pulled out a sketchbook. "I heard you like to draw," he said. Lucas blinked. McKinnon flipped to a blank page and handed over a pencil. "Want to show me how you see the world?" Lucas hesitated, eyes flicking to his mother. She gave a small, reassuring nod. Then slowly he reached for the pencil. For the next 10 minutes, no one spoke. Lucas drew. McKinnon watched. Emily stared at the floor, unsure what was happening but unwilling to interrupt. When Lucas finished, he turned the sketch around. It was a self-portrait, one eye closed under the weight of the tumor, the other wide and watchful. But the detail was stunning. The shading, the line work, the honesty. McKinnon studied it carefully. "You see more than most surgeons I know," he said. Lucas looked up, surprised. Not flattered, just seen. It was the beginning. After the sketch was set aside, and the air had settled into something almost comfortable, Dr. McKinnon gently cleared his throat. "Lucas," he said, "would it be all right if I took a closer look?" Lucas didn't answer right away. Then slowly, he nodded. Emily stood, moving toward the hallway to give them space, but McKinnon gestured for her to stay. "He should have someone near," he said softly. Lucas shifted on the couch as the doctor scooted closer. McKinnon's hands moved with the calm confidence of a man who had done this 1,000 times because he had. "No gloves?" Emily asked, a little surprised. "Not yet," McKinnon replied. "Right now, he's not a patient. He's just a young man letting a stranger into his world." Lucas swallowed hard. McKinnon leaned in carefully, not touching yet, just observing. The tumor was even more complex than he'd imagined. It had grown down the left side of Lucas's face, enveloping the cheekbone, distorting the jawline, and pulling at the skin near the temple. The coloration suggested a vascular component, likely an arteriovenous malformation. "Do you get headaches?" he asked. Lucas nodded. "Sometimes, on this side. Any numbness?" "Just around the eye." McKinnon made mental notes. He gently asked permission to touch, then placed 2 fingers near the edge of the mass. Lucas didn't flinch, but Emily clenched her hands into fists. The tumor was warm to the touch, pulsing slightly. "Has it ever bled?" he asked. "Once," Emily said. "Years ago. He scratched it in his sleep. It didn't stop for hours." McKinnon exhaled through his nose. "That makes sense," he leaned back. "I won't sugarcoat it," he said, voice even. "This is one of the more advanced facial tumors I've seen. We're dealing with compromised vascular tissue, likely embedded nerve pathways, and the risk of rupture during removal is high." Emily didn't move. Lucas's face was blank. "But it's operable," McKinnon added. "With the right team, the right setup, and a bit of luck, we can give you a different life." "A better life?" Lucas asked quietly. "No," McKinnon said. "That part is already up to you. I can't give you better. I can give you possible." The room fell quiet. Emily spoke first. "What are the risks?" "Facial paralysis, partial or full loss of vision in the left eye, damage to the jaw, possibility of skin grafts, and yes, there's a risk of death, not high but real." She looked down. Lucas asked, "Will it hurt?" McKinnon hesitated. "It'll be the hardest thing you've ever done, but pain passes. Regret doesn't." The boy didn't flinch. He just stared at the floor for a long time, then said, "If I don't do this, will it keep growing?" "It's likely," McKinnon replied, "and eventually it may interfere with breathing, swallowing, maybe more." Lucas nodded, as if he already knew. "I'll need updated scans," McKinnon continued. "CT, MRI, vascular mapping. We'll do those in Amarillo. I'll arrange everything." Emily glanced up. "And the cost?" McKinnon looked at her, firm but kind. "There's no bill coming to your house," he said. "Not from me. Not from anyone I work with." A sound escaped Emily's throat, somewhere between a sob and a laugh. She covered her mouth. Lucas blinked hard but stayed silent. McKinnon stood and packed his notes. "I won't rush you," he said, slinging the bag over his shoulder. "But the clock is ticking. You don't need to be brave right now. Just be willing." He turned to Lucas one last time before heading to the door. "You've already survived this long. That tells me you've got what it takes to do the rest." And with that, he stepped into the late afternoon sun, leaving the boy and his mother staring at the closed door, feeling, for the first time in years, not fear, but choice. The morning of the surgery arrived like a whisper. No alarms, no dramatic sunrise, just gray skies over Elmdale and the hum of tires on gravel as Emily's car pulled out of the driveway. Lucas sat in the back seat, staring out the window. He clutched a small sketchbook in his lap, not because he planned to draw, but because it gave his hands something to hold, something familiar. Emily glanced at him in the mirror every few minutes but didn't speak. What was there to say? Anna had met them at the gas station on the edge of town. She drove ahead, her taillights blinking steadily through the low morning fog. In her passenger seat sat a duffel bag filled with forms, snacks, and a pair of fuzzy socks she'd bought for Lucas at the dollar store. He didn't know that yet. The drive to Amarillo took a little under 2 hours. When they reached the hospital, the building loomed larger than Lucas expected. Clean glass, bright lights, automatic doors that whooshed open like something from a spaceship. He stayed close to Emily as they walked through the lobby. A nurse met them at the desk. "Tran, Lucas?" Emily nodded. "You're with Dr. McKinnon?" Another nod. "Come with me." They followed her down a long hallway painted in cheerful tones of yellow and blue. Lucas noticed a mural on the wall. Children flying kites, running through fields, smiling wide. None of them looked like him. The room was small but warm. A bed, a chair, machines that beeped softly. Lucas changed into a gown. Anna stayed just outside the curtain, humming a song he didn't recognize. When he emerged, she smiled. "You look ready." "I don't feel ready," he admitted. "That's okay," she said. "Feeling ready isn't a requirement. Showing up is." Dr. McKinnon arrived 5 minutes later, dressed in scrubs, clipboard under his arm. He looked tired, but focused, alive in the way surgeons often were before a big case. "How are we doing?" he asked. Lucas shrugged. "Nervous." "That makes 2 of us," McKinnon said. Then he leaned in and added, "which usually means something important is about to happen." He went over the details again, step by step. Not because they hadn't heard it before, but because repetition was comfort, knowledge, power. "Once you're under anesthesia," he explained, "we'll begin mapping the vessels. That's the most delicate part. From there, we'll move layer by layer. If we run into any complications, we'll pause. There's no rush. We're doing this right, not fast." Emily nodded, arms folded tightly across her chest. Is he going to wake up looking different?" she asked. McKinnon paused. "Yes, but not perfect. This is just the first stage. There may be scarring, asymmetry. There will be healing." Emily swallowed. "He's been through worse." Lucas looked at both of them, then quietly said, "Can I ask you something?" "Anything," McKinnon replied. "Have you ever failed?" The doctor didn't flinch. "Yes, more than once." Lucas blinked. "And you still try?" "I try because I failed," McKinnon said. "That's how you learn what matters." Lucas nodded slowly. The nurse returned with the gurney. It was time. Emily kissed Lucas on the forehead. Her lips lingered longer than usual. "No matter what, I'm right here," she whispered. Anna gave him a thumbs up. "See you soon, superhero." Lucas climbed onto the gurney. The wheels began to turn. As he was rolled toward the operating room, ceiling tiles passed overhead like slow-moving clouds. He closed his eyes, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't hiding. He was stepping forward. The operating room was cold, sterile, quiet, except for the steady beep of the heart monitor and the soft murmur of surgical prep. Dr. McKinnon stood at the scrub sink, sleeves rolled, hands moving in the mechanical rhythm of a man who'd done this hundreds of times, but never like this. Not for a boy like Lucas. Inside the OR, the team moved efficiently. A vascular specialist from Houston had flown in at McKinnon's request. An anesthesiologist monitored every breath Lucas took. 2 nurses double-checked the trays, scalpels, clamps, suction, and a handheld Doppler for real-time blood flow tracking. McKinnon stepped in. He looked down at Lucas, still, pale and draped in a sterile blue sheet. The tumor distorted nearly half his face, like melted wax frozen in time. But underneath it, McKinnon saw something else. Structure, possibility, a future. "Begin mapping," he said. The vascular specialist started with ultrasound probes, scanning the lesion, watching the screen light up with tangled vessels, some pulsing with high-flow arterial blood, others delicate and hair-thin. "Arteriovenous," the specialist confirmed. "Complex, but traceable." McKinnon studied the patterns. "Clamp here," he instructed, pointing. "And here. We isolate these lines before we touch the core." The first hour was spent just cutting off blood supply. Every millimeter mattered. A slip, and Lucas could bleed out in minutes. Twice they paused. Once to cauterize a vessel that wasn't on the scan. Once because the Doppler went silent, then beeped again. McKinnon didn't flinch. His hands were steady, his breath even. This was what he lived for. By hour 3, they reached the central mass. The texture changed, denser, more fibrous. Nerve bundles interlaced with muscle and malformed tissue. It was like trying to remove tree roots from a spider web. "Facial nerve coming through," said one nurse. "I see it," McKinnon replied. "Retract gently." They used micro-dissection tools now, fiber optic lighting, magnifying loops, the kind of gear normally reserved for elite hospitals, not a rural OR in Texas. But it didn't matter. What mattered was precision. What mattered was Lucas. Suddenly, blood, bright, fast. "Clamp!" McKinnon barked. The specialist moved instantly, but the flow was strong. "Where is it coming from?" the anesthesiologist asked, already adjusting fluids. "Posterior feeder," McKinnon said. "It wasn't on the scan." He pressed down with gauze, 1 second, 2, 3, then pressure slowed. "Clamp secured," said the specialist. McKinnon let out a breath but didn't speak. His eyes were locked on the field. "Give me 5 more minutes," he said. No one answered. They just worked. At hour 5, the tumor was out. He held it up, heavy, pale, almost alien, like something that had never belonged to a boy in the first place. "Prep for closure," he said. They reconstructed as much as they could, muscle alignment, skin repositioning, temporary grafts. It wasn't cosmetic. It wasn't perfect, but it was human. It was his face, reclaimed. McKinnon's hands slowed as they placed the final sutures. Then silence, except for the monitor. Beep, beep, beep. Stable. He stepped back, removed his gloves, and whispered something no one else heard. "Good job, kid." Outside, Emily sat in a stiff plastic chair, fingers locked together in her lap. Anna was beside her, offering quiet support, her eyes on the clock. When McKinnon finally entered the waiting room, his gown was wrinkled, his shoulders sagged, but he smiled. "He's out," he said, "and he's okay." Emily didn't speak. She simply stood and buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. McKinnon walked over and gently touched her arm. "He was brave," he said. "Braver than most grown men I know." Then he turned to Anna. "Let's get him home." Lucas awoke to a soft beeping sound and the faint scent of antiseptic. His mouth felt dry, his body heavy. For a moment, he didn't remember where he was. Then he opened his eyes and remembered everything. The hospital ceiling, the IV in his arm, the bandages around his face, tight but not painful. And then the voice. "You're awake." It was Emily. She leaned in, her hand gently brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "How long?" Lucas croaked. "Almost 10 hours, she said. "The surgery went well. Dr. McKinnon said you were strong." Lucas tried to speak again, but his throat tightened. His lips were cracked. Emily reached for a small cup with a straw and helped him sip. Water never tasted so good. He looked around the room. It was quiet, dim. The window let in the soft blue of early evening. "I can't feel half my face," he murmured. Emily nodded. "They said that might happen for a while. Nerve bruising." He swallowed hard. "Is it still there?" Emily hesitated. "The tumor? No, it's gone." Lucas turned his head slowly toward the wall. He didn't ask for a mirror. Not yet. That night he didn't sleep much. Nurses came and went. Machines beeped. The pain was dull but constant, a throb beneath the bandages. But worse than the pain was the fear, not of failure, but of change. He'd spent his whole life hidden, drawing faces he didn't have, imagining what people would say if they saw the real him. Now, they would. The next morning, Anna arrived with her usual energy. She carried a small bag of snacks, a crossword puzzle book, and a pair of the fuzzy socks. Lucas looked at her and managed a dry smile. "I lived," he said. Anna grinned. "You did more than that. You rewrote your story." He glanced toward the bathroom mirror, still covered by a privacy shade. "I don't think I'm ready to read it yet." "That's okay," she said. "Chapters take time." Later that day, Dr. McKinnon came in. He checked vitals, examined the incisions, asked a few routine questions. Then he pulled up a stool beside the bed and looked Lucas in the eyes. "You did incredibly well," he said. "We removed almost 90% of the mass. There may be some residual work needed, follow-up procedures, cosmetic refinements. But the danger? That's behind us." Lucas nodded. "Does it look bad?" McKinnon paused, choosing his words. It looks like a young man who fought a war and won. There are stitches, some swelling, but beneath all that, you're still you. That answer hung in the air, because for Lucas, that was the hardest part. For so long, the tumor had been his identity, his mask, his excuse, his reason. Without it, who was he? McKinnon stood. You'll see when you're ready. But remember, no mirror can show what matters most. Lucas closed his eyes. He wasn't afraid of pain. He wasn't even afraid of scars. He was afraid of being seen and still not being enough. Lucas awoke to a soft beeping sound and the faint scent of antiseptic. His mouth felt dry, his body heavy. For a moment, he didn't remember where he was. Then he opened his eyes and remembered everything. The hospital ceiling, the IV in his arm, the bandages around his face, tight but not painful. And then the voice. You're awake. It was Emily. She leaned in, her hand gently brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. How long? Lucas croaked. Almost 10 hours, she said. The surgery went well. Dr. McKinnon said you were strong. Lucas tried to speak again, but his throat tightened. His lips were cracked. Emily reached for a small cup with a straw and helped him sip. Water never tasted so good. He looked around the room. It was quiet, dim. The window let in the soft blue of early evening. I can't feel half my face, he murmured. Emily nodded. They said that might happen for a while. Nerve bruising. He swallowed hard. Is it still there? Emily hesitated. The tumor? No, it's gone. Lucas turned his head slowly toward the wall. He didn't ask for a mirror. Not yet. That night he didn't sleep much. Nurses came and went. Machines beeped. The pain was dull but constant, a throb beneath the bandages. But worse than the pain was the fear. Not of failure, but of change. He'd spent his whole life hidden, drawing faces he didn't have, imagining what people would say if they saw the real him. Now, they would. The next morning, Anna arrived with her usual energy. She carried a small bag of snacks, a crossword puzzle book, and a pair of the fuzzy socks. Lucas looked at her and managed a dry smile. I lived, he said. Anna grinned. You did more than that. You rewrote your story. He glanced toward the bathroom mirror, still covered by a privacy shade. I don't think I'm ready to read it yet. That's okay, she said. Chapters take time. Later that day, Dr. McKinnon came in. He checked vitals, examined the incisions, asked a few routine questions. Then he pulled up a stool beside the bed and looked Lucas in the eyes. You did incredibly well, he said. We removed almost 90% of the mass. There may be some residual work needed, follow-up procedures, cosmetic refinements, but the danger? That's behind us. Lucas nodded. Does it look bad? McKinnon paused, choosing his words. It looks like a young man who fought a war and won. There are stitches, some swelling, but beneath all that, you're still you. That answer hung in the air. Because for Lucas, that was the hardest part. For so long, the tumor had been his identity, his mask, his excuse, his reason. Without it, who was he? McKinnon stood. You'll see when you're ready. But remember, no mirror can show what matters most. Lucas closed his eyes. He wasn't afraid of pain. He wasn't even afraid of scars. He was afraid of being seen and still not being enough. It was on the third morning that Lucas asked for the mirror. He didn't say it aloud. He simply pointed. Emily looked at him, uncertain. Are you sure? Lucas nodded once. His lips were dry, but his eyes were steady. Anna stood at the foot of the bed. She didn't speak either. She just walked to the small cabinet near the sink and retrieved the hand mirror wrapped in a hospital towel. Lucas sat up slowly, his stitches pulling gently. The swelling had gone down slightly, but not enough to hide the bruising. His face felt foreign, heavy in some places, light in others, like someone had rearranged the map of a city he used to live in. Emily placed the mirror in his hand. For a second, he didn't look. His thumb brushed the edge of the glass. Then slowly he raised it. What stared back wasn't the monster the world had told him he was. It wasn't perfect. One side was swollen, the stitches like railroad tracks curving beneath his eye and down along his cheek. The skin was raw, pink, unfamiliar. But for the first time he saw his face, the bones underneath, the symmetry, the possibility. And his eye, his left eye, was open. He exhaled sharply. His hand trembled. Tears welled up, unexpected, uncontrollable. Emily stepped forward, thinking he was in pain. Lucas, He shook his head. I'm not sad, he whispered. I just didn't know I was still in here. Anna put a hand over her mouth, blinking fast. McKinnon entered the room a few minutes later. When he saw Lucas holding the mirror, he paused at the door, then gave a small nod. I remember my first big surgery, he said. I came out thinking the work was over. He stepped closer, pulling up a chair. But healing isn't a moment, it's a process. Some of it happens here. He tapped the bed, but most of it happens out there. Lucas stared into the mirror a moment longer, then placed it on the table beside him. I don't know how to talk to people, he admitted. I've never had to. You don't need to say much, McKinnon said. Just be present. People will feel the difference. Emily smiled, brushing a hand through her son's hair. You've always had more inside you than people ever gave you credit for. Lucas looked at her. Do you think they'll recognize me back in Elmdale? Maybe not right away, she replied. But that's not the point. The point is, you'll recognize you. Anna added softly. You get to introduce yourself now, on your terms. That afternoon, Lucas stood up for the first time since the surgery. He walked slowly to the window, hands gripping the IV pole. Outside, the world looked normal. Cars, people, clouds rolling by. But for Lucas, everything had changed. He reached up and gently touched his cheek, feeling the uneven skin, the swollen tissue, the jagged lines where part of him used to be. And he smiled. Not because he was proud, not because it was over, but because, for the first time in his life, he wanted to be seen. The drive back to Elmdale was quieter than the one that had brought them to Amarillo. Lucas sat in the back seat, same spot, same sketchbook in his lap. But this time, the pencil didn't move. He wasn't drawing monsters anymore. He wasn't hiding behind shading and charcoal. Now the blank page stared back at him, wide open, waiting. Emily kept glancing at him in the rearview mirror, as if making sure he was still breathing. You okay? She asked softly. Lucas gave a slow nod. Just thinking. About what? He paused. What people are going to say. She didn't answer at first. Then, let them talk. You've got nothing to be ashamed of. I know, he said. But knowing and feeling aren't the same thing. Anna had stayed behind in Amarillo to finish paperwork. Dr. McKinnon had already flown back to Chicago. But before he left, he gave Lucas a firm handshake and whispered, Remember, you don't owe anyone an explanation, only yourself the truth. It echoed now in his head as they turned onto the familiar road leading home. The town hadn't changed. Same old gas station with the flickering open sign. Same school building with the rusted fence. Same bakery that only opened 3 days a week. Familiar, predictable, but Lucas had changed, and that made everything feel different. When they pulled into the driveway, their neighbor, Mr. Jenkins, was mowing his lawn. He paused, pulled off his cap, and squinted toward the car. Emily waved politely. Lucas stepped out slowly, feeling the breeze hit his face. Not the old way, where he'd instinctively turned to hide the tumor, but fully, facing forward. Mr. Jenkins gave a long look, then a surprised blink. Then he smiled. Looking sharp, kid. Lucas nodded once. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Inside the house, everything smelled like lemon cleaner and thyme. Lucas walked into his room, set the sketchbook on his desk, and sat down in front of the mirror. Not the hospital mirror. This one. The one that had lived in his room his whole life, mostly unused, mostly avoided. Its surface was slightly cracked in one corner. Faded stickers from childhood still clung to the edges. He stared at himself, less swelling now. The stitches had dissolved. The skin around the scar was still red but healing. His left eye, once hidden under the mask, was clear, alert, watching him. For a second he forgot what he used to look like, and that somehow brought peace. A knock came at the door. Lucas? Emily's voice. Yeah? There's someone here to see you. His chest tightened. He stood, heart thudding, and walked into the living room. Standing by the front door was Mrs. Marlene, the retired art teacher from the local high school. She had gray hair tied up in a bun and wore thick glasses. Lucas Tran, she said, her voice full of emotion. Is that really you? Lucas offered a small smile. Yes, ma'am. I brought you something. She reached into her bag and pulled out an old folder. Inside were dozens of sketches, his sketches, from when he was in her online art class during lockdown. I kept them, she said. I always knew there was more to you than anyone saw. Lucas looked down at the drawings, shadows and shapes from a boy who never thought he'd be looked at with kindness. Thank you, he whispered. Mrs. Marlene reached out and touched his shoulder. You were always brave. Now the world finally gets to see it. Lucas didn't know what to say, but for once he didn't feel invisible. It was Lucas's idea to go back to school. Emily had offered to homeschool him for the rest of the semester. No pressure, no deadlines, no hallways filled with whispering. But Lucas shook his head. I need to try, he said. So on a Monday morning, 2 weeks after the stitches were gone, he stood in front of Elmdale High's entrance, backpack slung over one shoulder, sketchbook in the other. Students moved around him like water. Some glanced his way. Others didn't recognize him at all. A few stared too long, then quickly looked away. Lucas walked through the front doors without flinching. Inside, everything smelled like waxed floors and cafeteria pizza. Familiar, yet distant. As he passed the main hallway, someone behind him whispered, Is that him? Another voice answered, No way, is it? Lucas kept walking. In first period, his history teacher did a double take when he called roll. Lucas, Tran, present. The teacher blinked. Welcome back. Lucas nodded. At lunch, he sat at a quiet table near the courtyard windows. No one joined him, but no one pointed either. That, in itself, felt like progress. Halfway through the period, a shadow fell across the table. It was Jason Wells, the student council vice president and one of the only kids who'd ever spoken to Lucas without mockery. Jason was lanky, wore a hoodie even in warm weather, and always had paint on his fingers. Hey, he said. Lucas looked up. Hey. Jason set down a folder. We're working on a mural for the school courtyard, student-led project. I kind of fought for it. Lucas didn't say anything. Jason opened the folder to reveal sketches, concept drafts for the mural, trees growing through books, birds escaping cages, hands reaching for stars. Principal said we need someone who can help us pull it off, someone who actually knows what they're doing. He looked at Lucas directly. We voted. We want you. Lucas stared at the drawings. Why me? He asked. Jason shrugged. Because you're good. And because most of us are tired of pretending you're not here. Lucas blinked. That last sentence hit deeper than expected. Jason stood to leave, then hesitated. We meet after school. You don't have to come, but if you do, bring that. He pointed at the sketchbook. When he walked away, Lucas sat in stunned silence. No one had ever asked him to create in public, to lead, to step out. That night, he told Emily about it over dinner. She didn't say much, just smiled the kind of smile that says, I always knew this day would come. After they finished eating, Lucas opened his sketchbook, not to draw monsters, but to begin sketching roots. The art room at Elmdale High smelled like turpentine and pencil shavings. Lucas stood just inside the doorway, his sketchbook clutched against his chest like armor. Across the room, half a dozen students sat around folding tables scattered with paint tubes, brushes, and crumpled reference photos. Murmurs floated in the air, talk of color palettes, brush techniques, who was bringing snacks tomorrow. No one looked up when he walked in. Jason was at the far end of the room, bent over a large canvas mock-up of the mural design. When he saw Lucas, his face lit up. Hey, you came. Lucas gave a short nod. Yeah, I figured I'd check it out. Jason waved him over. Come on, you're just in time. We're finalizing the composition. Lucas approached slowly, aware of the eyes that were now beginning to notice him. A few students whispered. One girl did a double take. Another smiled politely, then looked away. Jason didn't seem to notice. He tapped the canvas. So, we've got this tree, centerpiece. Its roots go down the side of the wall and the branches stretch across the top. Each branch will represent a theme: growth, curiosity, resilience. He turned to Lucas. I was hoping you'd take the roots. Lucas raised an eyebrow. Why the roots? Jason shrugged. Because they're the foundation. And honestly, I think you understand what it means to grow from something deep, maybe even painful. Lucas wasn't sure how to respond, so he opened his sketchbook and flipped to the page he'd drawn the night before. Bold, twisted lines forming the base of a massive tree. Raw, grounded, real. Jason leaned in. Whoa, that's incredible. By now, the others had gathered around. A tall girl with paint-splattered jeans said, You drew that? Lucas nodded, suddenly hyper-aware of how quiet the room had gotten. Jason looked around. This is Lucas, by the way. He's joining us. A few nods. One cool. Then they returned to their work. Just like that. Lucas wasn't sure what he'd expected. Applause, awkward silence, a wave of judgment. But what he got was normalcy, and it felt amazing. He sat with the group for the next hour, quietly sketching variations of the roots while others discussed colors and styles. Every now and then, someone would pass him a brush or ask his opinion, not out of pity, just curiosity. About halfway through, the girl in the paint jeans, her name was Priya, sat beside him. "Your shading's insane," she said, pointing at one of his designs. "You do charcoal?" "Mostly," Lucas said. "But I'm learning ink," she grinned. "Nice, you'll love gouache. Messy as hell, but super fun." Lucas smiled, small, real. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't thinking about his face, or his scars, or what people whispered in the halls. He was just part of something. And that was enough, for now. The mural began the following Saturday. Lucas arrived early, sketchbook tucked under one arm, hair still damp from a nervous shower. The courtyard wall stretched tall and blank before him, a canvas waiting to become something more. The others arrived shortly after. Jason brought buckets of primer. Priya carried trays of brushes. By 9 a.m., music played from a speaker in the corner, and the smell of paint filled the air. Lucas stood in front of the wall, marker in hand, outlining the roots he'd drawn a dozen times on paper. But this time, they were real. They would stay. His hand trembled slightly as he worked, not because of nerves, at least not entirely, but because this was public, visible, permanent. By midday, a few students not part of the art team had wandered over to watch. "Is that the Tran kid?" someone whispered nearby. "Didn't he used to have, like, a thing on his face?" Lucas kept his eyes on the wall. The marker moved steadily, line by line. Jason must have noticed the tension because he cranked the music a little louder and shouted, "Lunch break in 10, people! Root section is killing it!" Lucas smiled despite himself. During the break, Priya plopped down next to him on the grass, chewing on a granola bar. "You okay?" He hesitated. "Yeah, just hard sometimes. I hear everything." She nodded. "They're gonna talk. That's not your fault." "I know," he said. "It's just, after everything, I thought I'd feel unstoppable." "You are," she said. "But that doesn't mean the world catches up overnight." Lucas looked at his hands, stained with black primer, fingertips raw. "I used to dream about this," he said quietly, "being normal, being seen. But now that I am, it's scary in a different way." Priya tore off a piece of granola bar and handed it to him. "Here, sugar helps with emotional whiplash." He laughed, short but real. When they returned to the wall, Lucas switched to paint. The brush felt heavier than a pencil, less forgiving, but more alive. He dipped it in a mixture of brown and gray and began filling in the roots, letting the shapes twist and sink into the foundation of the mural, like veins into soil. At one point, a freshman boy came closer than the others. He watched Lucas work, eyes wide. Then he asked softly, "Did it hurt?" Lucas paused, brush midair. "Shh." "Yeah," he said. "It did." "Are you mad?" the boy asked. "About how people treated you before?" Lucas thought about that, about the years of stares, the silence, the hallway detours. "I was," he admitted. "Sometimes I still am." The boy nodded solemnly. "I used to draw monsters, too." Lucas looked over at him, surprised. "You still do?" The kid shook his head. "Not anymore." Lucas smiled. "That's okay. Just means it's time to draw something else." The boy grinned and ran off. Jason wandered over with a bottle of water. "You mentoring now?" Lucas smirked. "One at a time." By the end of the day, the roots were finished, thick and textured, wrapping the bottom half of the wall like armor. Students and teachers alike walked by, snapping photos, murmuring praise. But Lucas didn't hear any of that. All he heard was the silence inside him, the silence that used to feel like emptiness, but now felt like peace. The day of the mural unveiling arrived with golden sunlight and a breeze that carried the smell of cut grass and chalk dust. Lucas stood near the edge of the courtyard, dressed in a simple black button-up and jeans. His hands were tucked into his pockets, thumb nervously brushing the fabric. It was strange seeing the school this full on a weekend. Students, teachers, local business owners, even some people he didn't recognize, had shown up. The mayor was there too, wearing a slightly crooked tie and holding a clipboard. Someone from the local paper walked around with a camera, snapping photos of everything and everyone. Lucas felt a drop of sweat trail down his neck. Jason walked over, wearing his usual hoodie, sleeves rolled up, a paintbrush stuck behind one ear. "You good?" he asked. Lucas hesitated, then nodded. "I think so." Jason grinned. "You should be. It looks amazing." Lucas glanced at the mural, still hidden behind a long white cloth. He hadn't seen it in full since they finished painting, not with fresh eyes, not with the knowledge that the entire town would see it too. "I'm not worried about the mural," Lucas admitted. Jason tilted his head. "What then?" Lucas's voice dropped. "I'm not used to being visible, and today I feel like I'm under a spotlight." Jason shrugged. "Maybe, but you earned it." Emily stood nearby, talking quietly with Anna, who had driven in from Amarillo for the unveiling. Both of them beamed whenever they glanced Lucas's way. His mother's eyes shimmered with pride, and something else, relief. The kind of relief that comes when the storm finally breaks and you realize the house is still standing. The principal took the microphone at exactly 10 a.m. "Welcome, everyone," he said, his voice echoing across the courtyard. "Today, we unveil more than just a piece of student artwork. We celebrate community, resilience, and the courage to be seen." Lucas swallowed hard. When the cloth was pulled away, a collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The mural was enormous, spanning the entire back wall of the courtyard. The tree stood tall and bold, branches reaching skyward, bursting with color. Blue for curiosity, green for growth, red for strength, yellow for hope. But it was the roots that stopped people in their tracks. They were raw, powerful, textured. Not just lines, but stories. Within the roots, smaller shapes had been hidden. A hand reaching up, an eye peeking through soil. The silhouette of a face emerging from shadow. It wasn't just a tree, it was a transformation. People murmured, pointed, took photos. Lucas didn't move. He just stared at it, the same way he once stared at hospital walls and bedroom ceilings. Only this time he wasn't waiting for something to change. He was the change. Jason nudged him. "You want to say something?" Lucas froze. "Me? Talk?" Jason smiled. "Why not?" Lucas looked at the crowd, at his mother, at Mrs. Marlene standing with other retired teachers, at the boy from the mural day, now wearing a sketchbook around his neck like a badge. He took a slow, shaky breath and stepped forward. Lucas stood in front of the microphone. The cord trembled slightly in the wind, just like his fingers. A hush had fallen over the courtyard, the kind that only comes when people are waiting, not out of politeness, but from curiosity, from hope. He looked around. Faces stared back, familiar, unfamiliar. Some he remembered from behind locker doors and cafeteria tables. For a moment, he thought about walking away. But then he saw the mural behind him, the roots, the hand, the silhouette, his story etched in color and light and permanence. So he took a breath and spoke. "My name is Lucas Tran," he began, voice soft but steady. "Most of you know me, or thought you did." A few quiet chuckles rippled through the crowd. "I used to walk these halls with my head down. I used to sit in the back of classrooms, hoping no one would notice me. And when they did notice, it was usually for the wrong reasons." He paused. "When I was born, I had a condition that caused a tumor to grow on my face. For 16 years, that's what people saw first. Some people looked away, some stared too long, but almost no one asked what it was like to live inside it." Emily wiped at her eyes, standing in the front row. "I didn't blame anyone," Lucas continued. "We all have things we don't understand. But what I didn't realize until recently is that I had also stopped seeing myself. I let the tumor define me. It became the mask I never asked for." He looked directly at the boy who had once asked, "Did it hurt?" "Yes, it hurt. It hurt every day, not just physically, but emotionally, to feel like the world only knew one version of you." A deeper silence settled over the courtyard. Then, earlier this year, something changed. I had the chance to meet a doctor, someone who saw beyond my condition. And I had a mother who never stopped believing I was worth more than the looks I got from strangers. I had a teacher who saved my drawings, a friend who handed me a brush and said, "You belong here." He turned to Jason and smiled. So I stepped forward. I said yes, and it was terrifying. He gestured toward the mural behind him. But this mural, these roots, they're not just paint. They're proof that we all come from something deeper, something invisible. Pain, joy, fear, love. Those things shape us just as much as what's on the surface. A pause. I still have scars, you can probably see them. But what you can't see are the scars I've started to heal on the inside. The ones that told me I was broken, unworthy, alone. His voice cracked slightly, but he didn't stop. I'm not here to give a speech about being brave or overcoming adversity. I'm just here to say you don't need to be perfect to belong. You don't need to be flawless to be seen. You just need to show up and let people see the real you. He stepped back from the microphone. No music played, no announcer thanked him, but the courtyard erupted in applause, not loud, not forced, but real, long. People stood. Some clapped with tears in their eyes. Mrs. Marlene hugged her husband. The boy with the sketchbook cheered. Priya threw both fists in the air. And Emily? She stood still, both hands over her mouth, eyes shimmering with the weight of 1,000 unspoken prayers, finally answered. Lucas didn't wave, didn't bow. He just smiled, because for the first time in his life, he knew they weren't just looking at him, they were seeing him. The house was quiet when they returned, the kind of quiet that hangs in the air after something monumental, like the silence after a storm, when the wind has died down and all that's left is the echo of what once was. Lucas stepped inside, toes brushing the familiar threshold of his home. The mural unveiling already felt like a memory, like something that had happened to someone else in another life. Emily dropped her keys on the counter and turned to him. You were incredible, she said softly. Lucas nodded, still caught in the weight of the moment. I don't know how I did it, he admitted. Because you were ready, she replied. You just didn't know it until now. He gave her a small, grateful smile. Then he excused himself and walked to his room. The door creaked the same way it always had. The posters were still slightly crooked on the wall. The stack of old sketchbooks still leaned like a tower on his desk. And the mirror. It sat on the dresser across from his bed, the same mirror he had once covered with a sweatshirt, the one he used to avoid. Now it reflected the fading afternoon light. And him. Lucas stepped toward it. He stared at his reflection. The scars were still there. The curve of the jawline had changed slightly since surgery. The left eye, once shadowed by the tumor, now stared back, clear, open, observant. He looked different, but also the same, because underneath all of it, he was still Lucas, still the boy who drew monsters to understand his fear, still the son of a woman who never stopped fighting for him, still the kid who once ate lunch alone and counted the seconds until the bell rang. But now, he was also something more. He was the boy who stood in front of a crowd and told the truth. He was the artist who put his paint on a wall for the world to see and turned it into beauty. He touched the scar near his cheek. It was healing, tender, but not angry anymore. Then slowly he sat at his desk, opened a fresh sketchbook, and began to draw, not a monster, not a face, not even a tree, but a quiet room lit by sunlight and a boy in front of a mirror smiling. A knock came at the door. Come in, Lucas said without looking up. It was Emily. She peeked in. I made tea, he smiled. I'll be right there. She hesitated, then stepped inside and sat on the edge of his bed. I wanted to ask you something, she said. If you don't mind. Sure. She picked up a small framed photo on his nightstand, one of Lucas at 6 years old before the tumor had grown too much, when his face still had its original softness. If you could talk to him, she said, nodding at the boy in the picture, what would you say? Lucas looked at the photo. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, I'd tell him it's going to hurt, that not everyone will understand, that there will be days he wants to disappear. Emily's expression tensed, but she didn't speak. Lucas continued, but I'd also tell him he's stronger than he thinks, that the pain won't last forever, and that one day he'll finally be seen. Emily reached over, took his hand, and gave it a gentle squeeze. Lucas looked at her and smiled. The following week unfolded with surprising normalcy. Lucas went back to school. Students still looked, still whispered, but now most smiled too. A few even stopped him in the hallway to say they liked the mural, or that his speech made them think. He was still getting used to that, being approached, not avoided. During lunch, he sat with Jason and Priya. They talked about art competitions coming up, college plans, and whether spray paint counted as a legitimate medium. Lucas mostly listened, but every now and then he laughed out loud, and it didn't feel strange anymore. That Friday when he got home, a letter was waiting on the kitchen table. It was from the hospital in Amarillo. He opened it slowly, his fingers more curious than nervous. Inside was a short note typed neatly, signed by Dr. McKinnon. Lucas, I've shared your mural photos and story with a few colleagues. There's been interest, not just in the surgery, but in the young man behind it. We're planning a patient art exhibit in Chicago this summer. Would you consider submitting a piece? Or better yet, coming in person? Let me know. Either way, you've already made an impression that goes far beyond Elmdale. Proud of you. Dr. M. Lucas reread the letter twice. Then a third time. Chicago? Exhibit? Him? He sat down at the kitchen counter, heart racing, not from fear, but from the dizzying thought. Maybe this isn't the end of my story. Maybe it's just the beginning. Emily walked in moments later, grocery bags in her arms. He handed her the letter without a word. She read it, blinked, then looked at him. Well, she said softly, what do you think? I don't know, Lucas said honestly. It's far, it's big. She smiled. So are you. That night, Lucas couldn't sleep. He sat at his desk, sketching aimlessly. Trees, skies, a window looking out onto a city skyline, a boy holding a brush the size of his whole body. Then his phone buzzed, unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Hello? A familiar voice replied, warm and calm. Lucas, it's Dr. McKinnon. Lucas sat up straighter. Hi, yeah, I just got your letter. I figured, McKinnon said. Didn't want to wait for an email reply. There was a pause. Then, you changed lives here, kid, more than you know. We had a parent come in last week with a child who has the same condition you had. When we showed them your mural and your speech clip, the mother cried. She said it gave her hope. You gave her hope. Lucas felt something shift in his chest. That old ache, but lighter now. McKinnon continued. So what do you think? Chicago's a big city. You'd meet other patients, maybe talk to young artists. No pressure. But I think you'd be great. Lucas stared at the drawing in front of him, the one with the boy and the giant paintbrush. I think I'd like that, he said. You sure? Lucas smiled. No, but I'm saying yes anyway. McKinnon laughed. That's the best kind of yes. After the call ended, Lucas sat for a long time staring at the ceiling. The world was still wide, still full of unknowns. But for the first time, Lucas didn't feel afraid of that. He felt ready. Lucas had never been on a plane before. The roar of the engines, the vibration beneath his seat, the feeling of being lifted off the ground, it was surreal. He glanced out the window and watched as Elmdale disappeared into patches of green and gray. Emily sat beside him, her hands folded calmly in her lap, though he noticed the way her thumb rubbed against her palm, her telltale sign of quiet nerves. You okay? He asked. She smiled. Are you? He didn't answer, just leaned back, closed his eyes, and tried to imagine what Chicago would be like. By the time they landed, the skyline had taken his breath away. Towers that reached for clouds, streets lined with murals bigger than houses, people moving like currents, fast and fluid, from every direction and walk of life. This isn't Elmdale, Lucas whispered. Emily laughed. Not even close. Dr. McKinnon greeted them at the airport with his usual calm presence and a slightly crooked tie. He looked both professional and somehow fatherly, the way only certain people in the medical field can. Welcome to the Windy City, he said, shaking Lucas's hand. You nervous? A little. Good, that means you care. They drove through the city in a black car arranged by the hospital. Along the way, McKinnon pointed out landmarks. The Art Institute, Millennium Park, a building with mirrored windows that reflected the sun like polished water. But Lucas wasn't really listening. He was watching the people, so many faces, so many stories, and no one was looking at him. For once, he wasn't the kid with the face, he was just another stranger with a backpack, and that felt freeing. The exhibit was held at a special gallery inside the hospital's Research and Wellness Center, a space designed not only to showcase medical innovations, but also patient experiences through art. It wasn't sterile or cold. It was vibrant, lived in. Lucas walked through the entry hall in awe. Photos of patients, sculptures, digital art, canvas after canvas filled with color and emotion, stories written beneath each one, and then his. Mounted in a central space, under a soft spotlight, was a frame print of the mural's root section. Below it, a plaque read, Foundations, created by Lucas Tran, age 16, from Elmdale, Texas. I used to draw monsters. Now I draw beginnings. He stepped closer. The print was perfect, every line, every shade. It looked even more alive here under this light. It felt like someone else had painted it, someone older, braver. People have been stopping here all morning, McKinnon said, appearing beside him. Some even cried. Lucas looked at him. I don't think I'll ever get used to that. You don't have to, McKinnon replied. Just don't ignore the impact. You've earned it. As they walked deeper into the gallery, they passed others like him. Young patients with visible scars, braces, walking aids, even missing limbs. But there was laughter, conversation, sharing. Lucas felt something crack open inside his chest. He wasn't alone, and he never had been. That afternoon, Lucas was invited to join a panel of young artists featured in the exhibit. There were 6 of them, seated on a small stage inside the gallery's open forum space. Each came from different cities, different backgrounds, but all shared one thing in common. Their art came from survival. The moderator, a woman named Michelle, who had once been a burn patient herself, opened the discussion gently. No need for speeches, she said with a warm smile. We're here to talk, like friends. The audience, made up of doctors, patients, families, and students, leaned in quietly. Each artist took turns sharing their journey. A girl from Detroit spoke about losing her leg in a car accident and how sculpting gave her back her sense of symmetry. A boy from New Orleans showed his collage of hospital meal trays and said he used humor to cope. When it was Lucas's turn, he wasn't sure what he would say. He held the microphone for a long second, feeling it pulse with the low hum of the speaker system. My name's Lucas, he began. I'm from a town called Elmdale. You've probably never heard of it. A few people chuckled. I was born with a tumor on my face. It grew for 16 years. Every year a little bigger. Every year a little heavier. He took a breath. For a long time, I thought I had to disappear to survive. I thought being quiet was the same as being safe. I used to draw monsters because it helped me explain the fear I didn't have words for. Silence. But then, someone saw something else in me. A doctor, a teacher, a friend with a paintbrush. And eventually I started seeing it too. He looked toward the back of the room where Emily stood, beaming. Now I draw roots, because healing starts underground. You don't always see it right away, but it's happening. The moderator smiled. That's beautiful. Lucas looked at the other artists and nodded. I used to think scars were the end of the story. Now I know they're just the punctuation. Later that evening, after the panel ended and the exhibit began to thin out, Lucas slipped away to the rooftop terrace. The city stretched around him like a quilt of lights and windows, stitched together by bridges and rivers and glass. He stood at the edge of the railing, letting the wind push gently against his face. The breeze felt different here, cooler, sharper, alive with momentum. Jason once told him that the scariest part of painting a mural was not the first brushstroke. It's the moment you step back and realize it's not just for you anymore, he had said. Lucas understood that now. This wasn't just his story anymore. It was for the boy who asked if it hurt, for the girl who still covered her face in the mirror, for the mother in the waiting room who didn't know what to hope for. He reached into his backpack and pulled out his newest sketchbook. In the corner of the first page, he wrote, "This is not the end. This is a door." Then he looked out at Chicago again, its glow, its chaos, its promise. And he smiled. Elmdale looked the same when they returned. The gas station on Main still had the flickering open sign. The bakery still smelled like cinnamon and rain. The old theater still had the same peeling posters in the windows. But Lucas had changed, and because of that, everything else felt different too. It was a warm Saturday morning when he stepped into the community center with a sketchbook under his arm. The place was quieter than he remembered, save for the faint hum of ceiling fans and the distant echo of kids laughing in the gym. Mrs. Marlene met him at the front desk, wearing her usual oversized cardigan and a look of delight. "You came," she said, hugging him before he could respond. "I said I would," Lucas smiled. "I just didn't think you'd say yes so quickly." Lucas glanced around. "You said the art room needed help. Figured it was my turn." She led him down the hallway toward a door that read, "Youth Arts Program, Room 2104. Inside, half a dozen kids sat at folding tables surrounded by paper, crayons, and little plastic cups of watercolors. Most were between 6 and 10 years old. A few wore eye patches. One had a walker, another had hearing aids, but every single one had a paintbrush in hand. Lucas paused in the doorway, the memories rushing back. He saw himself in them, not in their conditions, but in their quietness, in the way some avoided eye contact, in the way they drew without looking up, like they were trying to disappear into the page. Mrs. Marlene touched his shoulder. They know someone special is visiting today. He walked in slowly. One girl glanced up. Her eyes widened. "You're the boy from the mural," she said. Lucas blinked. "You saw it?" She nodded. "My brother showed me. He said you used to be scared too." Lucas smiled. He was right. The girl didn't say anything more, but she didn't look away either. He sat at the front of the room, flipping open his sketchbook to a blank page. "I thought maybe today we could draw something different," he said. "Not just people or trees." A few kids perked up. "What then?" one boy asked. Lucas held up his pencil. "Let's draw how it feels to be brave." The room went quiet. Then one child dipped their brush into blue. Another chose orange. Soon every page came alive, not with perfect shapes or outlines, but with color and chaos and courage. One boy drew a volcano with a face. Another painted a ladder rising into the clouds. The girl who had recognized him? She painted a tree with golden roots. Lucas moved from table to table, offering tips, not just about lines or texture, but about seeing, about turning fear into story. By the time the class ended, the walls were lined with wet paper and possibility. Mrs. Marlene looked over at Lucas as the children left. "You were right," she said softly. "It was your turn." Lucas stood alone for a moment after everyone had gone. He looked at the room, at the brushes drying by the window, at the sketches taped to the wall, at the place where art and healing met, quiet, unassuming, and powerful. He touched his cheek, where the scar still lived, then picked up a marker. And on the whiteboard at the front of the class, he wrote, "You are more than what they see." Then he added, "Mr. Tran." That evening, Lucas and Emily sat beneath the old oak tree in their backyard, the same tree that had watched him grow, cry, draw, and dream. The summer sun dipped low, casting golden shadows across the dry grass. Crickets had begun their nightly chorus, and a soft breeze moved through the leaves above. They didn't speak for a while. Sometimes silence says enough. Lucas leaned back against the tree trunk, legs stretched out in front of him. Emily sat beside him, sipping from a chipped mug of chamomile tea. "I forgot how quiet Elmdale gets at night," Lucas said. Emily smiled. "I never do. The stillness is what keeps me grounded." Lucas nodded. Chicago was incredible, but it wasn't home. "No," she agreed. "It wasn't supposed to be." He glanced up at the stars just beginning to blink into view. "Do you ever think we carry places inside us? Like they stay even when we leave?" Emily looked at him for a long moment. "I think we carry the people we become in those places. And they shape the version of us that comes home." Lucas thought about that. The boy he had been under this tree last year would never have believed who he'd become. He pulled a folded sheet of paper from his back pocket and handed it to her. "What's this?" Emily asked. "Application," Lucas said, "for a mentorship program with the National Children's Art Foundation. They want to expand into rural areas, places like ours. They're looking for artists who've lived through the system. Survivors, basically." Emily read the form slowly. When she looked up, her eyes shimmered. "You'd be perfect." "I was thinking," Lucas said, "about how I used to draw, just to survive. But now, maybe I can help someone else start." He hesitated, then added, "I don't know if I'm ready to be a mentor, but I know what it's like to need one." Emily reached over and squeezed his hand. "You don't have to be perfect to make a difference," she said. "You just have to be willing." He leaned his head back against the bark and exhaled. "I used to think healing meant forgetting, moving on, pretending it never happened. And now?" she asked gently. "Now I think healing means learning to carry it without letting it bury you." They sat quietly again, fireflies beginning to appear like tiny floating lanterns. Lucas reached into his bag and pulled out a sketchbook, his newest. He opened to the last page. Inside, he'd drawn a door. Not a fancy one, just a simple wooden door, slightly ajar. Behind it, light spilled out. Vague outlines suggested a new world just beyond. Above the door, he'd written, "Start here." Emily smiled when she saw it. "Where does it lead?" Lucas closed the sketchbook and looked at her. "I don't know yet," he said, "but I think I want to find out." And in that moment, beneath the tree that had once been a refuge and now felt like a marker of beginnings, Lucas knew something important. His scars didn't make him incomplete. They made him real, they told a story, but now he was ready to write the next one.